Welcome to episode 16 of Basically a Therapist, but without the degree. I'm Lauren Larson, and I'm just so honored that you're here with me. If you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, please do so. It would mean so much to me. So, in today's episode, we are going to continue the conversation about boundaries in family. And I know that this is such a big topic for many married couples because it's hard. It's hard to kind of figure out how to balance the family that you've always been with, that you've lived with your entire life, and then your new family that you've created, your wife, your kids, your spouse, whoever. And so before we dive into the rest of this episode, I want to start off with this verse because I don't think that this verse is by accident in the very first book of the Bible. And I think that it'll just lay the groundwork for the rest of this conversation. So Genesis 2:24 in the Passion Translation says, "And for this reason, a man leaves his father and his mother to be unselfishly attached to his wife. They become one flesh as a new family." And I feel like this verse in Genesis underscores the idea that when a man and woman marry, they just form an entirely new family unit, separate from their parents. And that can be hard for a lot of people. They form a new family with their spouse, and it's characterized by their commitment to one another. It's characterized by their bond between a husband and a wife. And so I think it's really important just to think about that verse, and we're going to dive into what boundaries look like with parents and siblings. So I want to first focus on that. I see a lot of people struggle that just because it's family, that anything is allowed and everything should be accepted. And this is such an unhealthy way of looking at our family relationships. Just because it's family doesn't mean that we accept disrespect, abuse, manipulation, toxic behavior, or anything of the kind. Yeah, blood is thicker than water, but it doesn't mean that you accept whatever. We are our own person, which is why setting boundaries with our parents and our siblings, grandparents, extended family, which is what we talked about last week, is crucial for maintaining healthy relationships, because we need to protect our own autonomy. We need to protect our own well-being. So let's talk about some strategies for setting boundaries with our parents and our siblings. So first of all, this requires you to reflect on your needs and your values. And these are going to be separate than your family. Sometimes they're the same. But sometimes when you grow up and you start experiencing life out on your own and you create your own family, your needs and your values can change. And that's okay. That is okay. It's normal. It's normal. Because we have been taught and raised a certain way, and we've seen things through how our parents have wanted us to see things. We haven't had a ton of life experience because we are still living under the authority of our parents. And so when we get out into the real world on our own, whether that's in college or whether that's in adulthood or whatever it is, it's then that we get to start experiencing life as our own person. And then we start seeing things separate from our family. So reflect on your needs and your values. Take time to really sit with yourself and figure out, what are my needs? What are my values? Like, what's important to me? What's important for my mental health, for my emotional health, for my spiritual health? What is important to me? Consider what behaviors or interactions are acceptable and unacceptable. Another one, communicate openly and assertively. Communicate your boundaries openly and assertively. So once you have determined what your needs and what your values are, it's then that you can start creating boundaries around those needs and around those values. So I said this last week, but when you are communicating your boundaries with others, use I statements. We are not here to blame other people. We are not here to make other people responsible for how we feel, because that's impossible. Okay, so we are showing up, taking full responsibility for our needs, our wants, our values, our expectations. And then it's up to them if they want to fulfill those needs. This isn't a way of manipulation or control or force. It is giving them the option to show up in the way that has full and direct access to you. Because if they show up in a way that is not respectful to you and your needs and your values, then they may not have that direct, complete access to you until they can show up in the way that you need. So once you have reflected on your needs and your values and you've communicated directly and assertively, you're going to set clear expectations. Clear is kind. You're going to set clear expectations for how you want to be treated, what behaviors are acceptable and unacceptable to you. Communicating these expectations to your parents and your siblings, and then be consistent in enforcing them. I feel like I say this, I feel like a broken record. I say this all the time, but consistency is key, because if you are going to set a boundary and then you're not going to hold the line, there's no point in the boundary. So make sure that the boundary that you want to put in place is a boundary that you plan on enforcing. Because if not, then back to the drawing board and there's no point of the conversation. Once you set clear expectations, you are going to establish consequences. This is hard. This is the hard part. This is where I feel like I lose a lot of people, because they feel like enforcing the boundary is mean. But if you think about it, it's not. And it's not a surprise that you're following through with something that you communicated to your family. And sometimes this might need to happen over and over and over again until they realize that you're actually serious. A lot of people will test you to see if you're actually serious about what you're saying, especially if you're somebody who doesn't typically follow through with your word. Expect to be tested. Expect people to toe the line, jump over the line, completely obliterate the line. Expect that. And you are there to hold firm. Establish boundaries around your personal space and your privacy with your parents and your siblings. This may include setting limits on how often you or they visit or call, as well as defining areas in your life that are off limits. One of the things that come to mind for me is parenting. I notice a lot of wives will kind of get into this like struggle with their mothers-in-law because of unwanted, unsolicited advice on how to parent kids. It can be tricky. Also, this goes both ways. So not only are you expecting respect for your boundaries, but you also need to show respect for their boundaries. Recognize that your parents and siblings have their own needs. They have their own boundaries, and strive to honor them just as you expect them to honor yours. Again, once you get into adulthood, and I know this can be tricky, and it's a new lesson to learn, especially as an adult teenager, like when you're 18, 19, 20, anywhere from like 18 to like mid 20s or early 20s, you're really learning what it's like to be an adult. And your relationship with your family changes because you're no longer dependent upon them. You're no longer reliant upon them to fulfill every need or anything like that, it can turn from being a parent relationship to more of a friendship relationship. If you're struggling with setting boundaries with your parents and your siblings, get support, seek help. It can be hard. This is a transitional time in life, no matter the age. If this is a new concept for you and you're 30 something, or like I said, if you are 18, 19, 20 and you're learning how to do this for the first time, it's hard. And so it's important for you to get support if you need it. And then be patient and consistent with your boundaries. It may take your family time to grasp the concept of boundaries, especially if you have grown up in a family that boundaries wasn't really anything. Be patient, have grace, but be consistent. Like I said earlier, be prepared for pushback. Be prepared for resistance. Be prepared for tension. These things aren't bad. It's just a learning opportunity for the both of you. And like I said earlier, stand firm in enforcing your boundaries while also just being open-minded and remaining open to communication, to dialogue, to hearing how they're feeling and what they're thinking about it all. It's okay. You can hear them, you can validate them, and still hold the line. Yeah, I understand how this is hard for you. I know that we can get through this. Or, yeah, I know this is hard and I thank you for respecting where I stand on this. Boom. Focus on healthy communication. We are not giving into passive aggressiveness. We are not giving into yelling. We are not giving into name calling, ridicule, insulting, anything of the sort. We are actively listening and empathetically showing up for their perspective. And that's it. Celebrate progress. Acknowledge the steps that you've taken to assert your needs. And also positively reinforce them when they respect your boundaries. Hey, thank you for not doing this when we talked, or thank you for doing this instead, or whatever. Call it out. Positively reinforce the behavior. You know, when you set clear boundaries with your parents, your siblings, your extended family, with anybody, honestly, it's going to foster, healthier, more respectful relationships with them, while also protecting your own well-being. Remember that boundary setting is a process. It requires ongoing communication. It requires a lot of patience. It requires self-awareness that some people lack. But the benefits of having boundaries in a relationship far outweigh not. So I want to share a couple of stories that kind of show the challenges and successes of setting boundaries. And these are some examples that I found. They're not mine. So Sarah has always been close to her mom, but as she's grown older, she began to feel suffocated by her mother's constant presence and interference in her life. Whenever Sarah tried to assert her independence or set boundaries, her mother would guilt trip her or dismiss her feelings. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Despite her frustration, Sarah struggled to stand up to her mother for fear of upsetting her or damaging the relationship. Side note, isn't it funny how we are more worried about damaging the relationship by standing up for and protecting our peace and not focusing on the fact that what's being done to us is also damaging the relationship? I don't know. It's kind of weird to me. So after years of feeling trapped and resentful, Sarah finally reached a breaking point. She realized that in order to maintain her mental and emotional well-being, she needed to establish clear boundaries with her mother. With the support of a therapist, Sarah found the courage to have an honest conversation with her mother about her need for space and autonomy. Initially, her mother reacted with anger and hurt, but Sarah remained firm in her boundaries while also expressing her love and appreciation for her mother. Over time, her mother began to respect Sarah's boundaries, and their relationship improved as a result. Sarah learned that setting boundaries was not about rejecting her mother, but about asserting her own needs and creating healthier dynamics in their relationship. Can anybody relate to Sarah here? And I have one more example for you that I found. James and Emily were a newly married couple, excited to share their life together. However, they soon realized that their relationships with their respective siblings were causing tension in their marriage. James's sister constantly intruded on their personal space, while Emily's brother frequently asked for financial assistance without considering their own financial goals. At first, James and Emily struggled to address these issues, fearing conflict or hurt feelings. But as the problems persisted, they knew they needed to take action to protect their marriage and their well-being. Together, they set boundaries with their siblings, clearly communicating their expectations and limits. Initially, there was resistance and pushback from their siblings, but James and Emily remained consistent in enforcing their boundaries while also expressing empathy and understanding. Over time, their siblings began to respect their boundaries, and their relationship improved as a result. James and Emily's marriage grew stronger as they learned to prioritize each other's needs and support each other in navigating challenging family dynamics. I hope that these examples kind of help you to see that, yes, boundaries with family can be challenging, but when you stick to them, they can be successful. When you are respectful and you're kind and you're empathetic and you're actively listening to the other party, helping them work through boundary resistance, I think it can be really beautiful. I think it could really strengthen the relationship, and it can take a relationship to new levels that you never thought were possible. It can create maturity not only in you, but in your marriage, in your family of origin. Just because your parents are older than you doesn't mean they're more mature. Emotionally, mentally. Age does not equal maturity, unfortunately. So let's get into setting boundaries with extended family in marriage. So married couples, they often face challenges when setting boundaries with extended family, including in-laws, siblings, other relatives, just like we were seeing with the previous example. And these strains, they can absolutely put a strain on the marital relationship. And they require careful navigation to maintain the connection between the spouses. Let's talk about some of the challenges that married couples can face. Number one is differing expectations. Each spouse may have a different expectation regarding the level of involvement or influence that their families can have on the marriage, on children, on things like that, finances. Balancing these expectations while setting boundaries can be challenging and may lead to disagreements and conflicts. Loyalty. This is what I hear a lot. Married couples may feel torn between their loyalty to their family of origin, their parents and their siblings, and their spouse. This can create some serious tension when setting boundaries with extended family members, especially if the spouse feels caught in the middle of their family and their spouse. And then also it's important to highlight, the cultural dynamics, because I know that there are different cultures that prioritize families of origin. And so cultural norms and family traditions can significantly influence expectations around boundaries with extended family. Couples from, differing cultural backgrounds may face challenges in navigating what this family dynamic can look like when they're married. Another challenge is interference in decision-making. Extended family members, including parents and in-laws, may attempt to interfere in the couple's decision-making process, whether it's regarding finances or parenting or other aspects of married life. this interference can undermine the couple's autonomy. And it can get in the way of the couple figuring out what their marriage is going to look like, what their finances together are going to look like, what parenting together is going to look like, etc. I know that I dealt with this in my first marriage. Again, I got married at 20 years old, very young. And I was definitely balancing detaching from my family of origin and attaching to my husband at the time. And it was difficult. I would go to my parents and share with them things about my marriage that, looking back, they didn't need to know. They didn't need to hear about it. It had nothing to do with them. It was between my husband and I. But I was young. I was 20. I was still a child, and I was still learning what being an adult looks like and not going to my parents for everything. And my parents got involved, and it wasn't necessarily their fault, I involved them. And then I realized once there was a little bit of an over involvement, and it wasn't out of malice or ill intent or anything like that. Like they wanted to protect me, they wanted to protect their daughter. And so they were willing to jump in and do whatever. And they were also learning, because I am the oldest child. And so we were all kind of learning together what me being married and what my relationship with my parents looked like. And it was a learning experience. It was a learning curve. And now in this marriage that I'm in now, I don't really share much about mine and my husband's issues. And that's with really anybody. It's not just specific to my parents. I don't really share my issues a lot with many people, because it's between my husband and I at the end of the day. It's not anybody else's business. I can ask for prayer, but I don't need to involve everybody. Let's talk about intrusive behavior as a challenge that married couples can face with their family. So this can look like family stopping by unannounced, walking right in, unsolicited advice, boundary violations. Addressing and setting boundaries around these behaviors can be sensitive. And it's important to work together to set these boundaries around this sort of thing. Another one is holidays and special occasions. It's a big one. Each of you are used to spending the holidays with your family probably. And then you guys come together, and who do you spend holidays with? Or what do holidays look like now? Who gets us on Christmas? Do we split our time on Christmas Day? I think of the movie, I think it's called Four Christmases, with Reese Witherspoon and Vince Vaughn. And they have step families, and they have this family and that family, and his mom and stepdad, her mom and stepdad, her dad and stepmom, his dad and stepmom. So there's 4 Christmases that they are trying to struggle, and they are just like, we can't do this. At the end of the movie, they realize this is too much. And so maybe that's what it looks like for you guys too. Maybe it looks like, instead of running yourselves ragged and running all over the city or all over the United States or all over wherever everybody is, maybe it looks like you hosting. Maybe it looks like choosing somebody's getting us on Christmas Eve and somebody's getting us on Christmas Day. I don't know what that looks like, but it's for you to determine what works best for both of you. And I feel like I need to say this, that you guys are a team. Your spouse is not the villain. It's not the villain. They are not the villain. Another challenge that married couples may face is guilt and obligation. Who has a family member that is so good at guilt tripping, beyond good? You may naturally just feel guilt or obligation when setting boundaries with your family, particularly if you are fear-based in that and you're afraid of upsetting them or hurting feelings or disappointing them. And once again, as Genesis 2:24 says, you and your spouse are now one. You and your spouse are now a family unit. And then the last challenge is financial expectations. Maybe you have some extended family members that have expectations around financial support or contributions from the married couple. And this can create massive amounts of tension between the spouses, between each other. It's important to set boundaries around financial matters. In married life, there are various scenarios that can arise when setting boundaries, right? And these situations often stem from just differing expectations, interference in decision-making, pressure. So let's dive into some common scenarios and tensions that couples may encounter. So talking about conflicting expectations. So each spouse may have different expectations regarding holidays, traditions, family gatherings. For example, one family may expect the couple to spend every holiday with them, while the other family may have similar expectations. So how do you balance who gets what and when they get it, if at all? And so these couples can feel torn. They can feel pulled between both families, leading to stress and guilt and frustration. And it can cause resentment within the families, within the marital relationship. Another one is interference in the decision making. So family members may offer unsolicited advice, right? Like it's just normal. Or attempt to influence their decisions regarding finances or career choices or parenting. Those are usually like the top ones, right? And so these couples may feel disrespected or undermined in their ability to make decisions for themselves. And this can lead to conflicts between the spouses, between their extended families, as well as feeling resentful and powerless, honestly. Or what about pressure to prioritize one family over the other? So couples may face pressure from their respective families to prioritize their interests, their needs, their traditions over their partner's family's needs, traditions. For example, one spouse's family may expect the couple to live closer, while the other family wants the same. We talked about a little bit earlier, but cultural and religious differences. So couples from different cultures and religious backgrounds may encounter tensions when navigating traditions, rituals, and expectations. And so differences in cultural and religious expectations and practices can lead to misunderstandings, conflicts, disagreements. Couples may need to negotiate how to honor and respect each other's cultural and religious traditions while setting boundaries that align with their shared values and beliefs. And then lastly, intrusive behavior. So there could be some extended family members that may stop by unannounced, right? Or ask prying questions or just flat out violate the boundaries. And this can cause the couples to feel overwhelmed, uncomfortable, tense. And if we let these go, it can create issues within the marriage. So let's talk about some practical strategies on how to deal with issues like this. So practical strategies for married couples in establishing those healthy boundaries with the extended family members. Number one, you need to prioritize your spouse. Prioritize their needs, their feelings, their well-being above the extended family. I know this is hard for some because this goes against how you've been raised or what you've experienced in the past, or it puts you in a really difficult position with your family. But when you get married, you are starting your own family. When you prioritize your spouse over your family, you're showing them and your spouse that you are unified with your spouse, that there is a sense of solidarity within the marriage. And it just reinforces that message, like I said earlier, that you two are a team. It is you two. Have open and honest discussions. Regularly communicate with your spouse about your expectations and your concerns and your boundaries regarding extended family involvement. Actively listening, empathizing. Work together to find a compromise. Work together to create a situation that works best for both of you. Set clear and consistent boundaries with extended family regarding topics like holidays and visits and finances and decision making. Communicate these boundaries assertively and respectfully. I'm thinking about the family that just feels like they need to butt into decision making, and maybe you don't talk about these sorts of things until a decision is made. You're going to present a united front to your family when communicating boundaries and addressing conflicts. You are not going to undermine each other or contradict your spouse's decisions in front of your family. This can create confusion, and it can show weakness and that you're not a united front. And if there are issues with your spouse's message or you disagree with something, talk about it in private. Handle it together privately between the two of you. And then if a boundary needs to be fixed or changed or whatever, then you can present yourself as a united front, saying, hey, we actually had another conversation about this and we think this, or we'd like to try this instead, or blah, blah, blah. You guys are a we. We have decided. We are thinking of. We are doing this. We want this. We. Practice assertive communication. Set realistic expectations. Again, this requires being patient. Create new traditions as couples and invite your family into it if you want. You don't have to, but if you want to. Maybe instead of, like I said earlier, instead of going to everybody else's house for Christmas, let's say, maybe you're starting to host Christmas and having everybody come over. Or maybe you guys meet in the middle of the country and rent a house together and celebrate the holidays that way. There are so many other options than just what's always been the norm. And change can be good and it can be healthy. And you can extend the invite to the family, and if they don't want to participate, then that's fine. It's okay. One of the biggest issues that I have struggled with is learning how to have boundaries and grace and what that looks like. And I've been on a journey of learning how boundaries and grace can coexist at the same time, because I always felt like having grace around boundaries meant allowing people to get away with it. And that's just not the case. So I want to talk about what it looks like to extend grace and being flexible in your boundaries when you are setting them with your family, because it is so important. And here's why. We can acknowledge imperfection, our own imperfection. In extending grace, it acknowledges that you and your family members are not perfect. We make mistakes. We unintentionally can overstep boundaries sometimes. And so having this grace and acknowledging our imperfection allows for us to be compassionate and understanding, right? We're not expecting perfection out of people. We're not punishing people if they mess up, especially if their intention was never to do so. If they were, like if there's an ill intent behind it, But if there's a person that is learning, they genuinely were just didn't know, that happens. Allow room for growth. Be flexible in your boundary setting. It's okay that boundaries aren't permanent and they can change over time. As individuals, we are growing and we are evolving and our needs change all the time. And so it's okay to be flexible and change these boundaries. When we extend grace and flexibility to our extended family, it helps preserve that underlying connection, that bond that we have with them. And it shows that, the relationship is more important than the rules or the expectations. Grace can also promote just open communication. Family members can feel more comfortable expressing their needs, their feelings, their wants, their hurts, their concerns, their boundaries, whatever, because they know that there's a transparency and there's an honesty and there's a grace for it. And they're not going to be judged. They're not going to be put down for it. This also allows mutual respect between family, between spouses, between the family and the spouses when disagreements arise. It allows for differing opinions, differing preferences, differing values and boundaries without judgment, without condemnation. Again, God doesn't punish us. He doesn't condemn us. So we are not to do the same to others, right? Life is full of transitions. It is constantly changing. There are new jobs, there are moves, there are children, there are life. It's just life. And so when we can adjust to these transitions, I think our family dynamics will allow compassion and support and an adaptation to new roles and responsibilities and needs. And then also when there is grace that's extended, especially when children are involved, it is teaching your children how to be grace-filled people as well. You can be strong and you can be a person that has boundaries and assertive, and you can also be grace-filled. The two can coexist and the two should coexist. I hope that this was helpful for you. I hope that you will take what we talked about today and apply it to your situation. If you are somebody that's struggling with families and boundaries, if you are a young adult that is transitioning from living with family and depending on family to being your own person and being independent, or if you are somebody that is starting your own family and you are learning this, I hope that this helps you and encourages you. And if you are somebody that knows somebody that's in that situation, share this episode with them so that it can encourage them and just kind of help them along their journey. Thank you again for being here. Again, hit that like and subscribe button, and I will see you next week. Bye. Yeah.